Hey everyone, and welcome to today's explainer. We're diving into something absolutely fascinating today: estrogen and progesterone. These are essentially architectural hormones, literally shaping the human body from the tiny molecular level all the way up to our full body systemic health. Let's get right into it. Okay, here's our agenda for today. We're going to cover the hormone regulatory system, move from cholesterol to hormone, look at target cell infiltration, explore cycles in pregnancy, dive into full-body systemic effects, and wrap up with estrogen and bone health. So, first things first, let's establish exactly what we're talking about here. Estrogen and progesterone are the primary female sex steroid hormones, and they're mostly produced by the ovaries. They're absolutely crucial for regulating reproduction and developing secondary sex characteristics. But, here's a kind of fun fact. Even though they're the main female sex hormones, biological men actually produce and need small amounts of estrogen too, just for their own reproductive functioning. Pretty cool, right? Section 1. The hormone regulatory system, or the brain-ovary connection. Alright, starting right around puberty, this incredibly elegant biological chain reaction kicks off. First, you got the hypothalamus up in the brain. It starts secreting these little pulses of a hormone called GnRH. This signal travels just next door to the pituitary gland, basically telling it to release two very important hormones, FSH and LH. Those two then travel all the way down through the bloodstream to the ovaries, and that's what causes the ovarian follicles to develop and, finally, secrete our star players today, estrogen and progesterone. Now, what's really dynamic about this whole feedback loop is that estrogen doesn't just, passively sit there in the body. It actively talks back to the brain. During the first half of the cycle, it sends a negative feedback signal, basically telling the pituitary, hey, dial back the FSH. But then, and this is wild, right before ovulation, it brilliantly flips to a positive feedback loop. Those high estrogen levels trigger a sudden, massive surge of LH and FSH, and that surge is exactly what makes ovulation happen. Moving on to Section 2. From cholesterol to hormone, the manufacturing plant. Okay, you might actually find this a bit ironic, but these super crucial sex hormones, they're actually built from cholesterol. Yeah, that lipid molecule that usually gets a bad rap in the health world. The whole biological assembly line kicks off by converting cholesterol into something called pregnenolone, and it uses an enzyme called desmolase to do that. From there, it's converted into an androgen, specifically testosterone. And finally, this overachieving enzyme called aromatase takes that testosterone and converts it into 17-beta-estradiol, and that right there is the most biologically active form of estrogen in the human body. If we think about this like a giant factory, the theca and granulosa cells inside the ovarian follicles are the literal assembly lines, and the specific enzymes we just mentioned, like desmolase and aromatase, they're the tireless workers on the floor, turning raw cholesterol into finished hormones. Then later in the cycle, the luteal granulosa cells completely shift gears. They bring in a different enzyme called P450-SCC to massively convert cholesterol into progesterone instead. Section 3. Target cell infiltration, delivering the message. So because estrogen is a lipid-based steroid, it can just smoothly pass right through a target cell's outer membrane. No resistance at all. Once it slips inside, it gets scooped up immediately by a highly specific receptor protein. Together, they travel deep, deep into the cell nucleus. That's where estrogen directly binds to certain genes on the DNA, fundamentally altering how that cell behaves from the inside out. I absolutely love the analogy on screen because it just perfectly captures the mechanism here. Think of that receptor protein exactly like a tiny, specialized taxi. It patiently waits around inside the cell, opens its doors for the estrogen molecule, and then safely navigates it through all the cellular fluid straight to its ultimate destination, the DNA vault inside the nucleus. Section 4. Cycles and pregnancy. The 28-day rhythm. Let's take a look at the two halves of the menstrual cycle. In the first 2 weeks, that's the follicular phase, estrogen is absolutely the boss. It's working hard to build and thicken up the superficial layer of the uterine lining. But then, right after ovulation, we enter the luteal phase. This is where progesterone steps up to take the lead. It stimulates glandular secretions to perfectly prep that uterine foundation, just in case of a potential pregnancy. Now, if a pregnancy actually does occur, we get this massive biological plot twist. The placenta literally completely takes over the entire manufacturing job from the ovaries. No kidding. And not only that, the main type of estrogen being produced abruptly changes from estradiol to a completely new form called estriol. This estriol, working alongside progesterone, works tirelessly to maintain the pregnancy and, super importantly, starts preparing the breasts for lactation. Section 5. Full body systemic effects beyond reproduction. Let's clearly contrast how these hormones impact biological males versus females. In biological women, estrogen develops the reproductive organs, matures breast tissue, and uniquely dictates how fat is distributed to the hips and thighs. But look at biological men. They absolutely require their own estrogen to actively help with sperm development, and it works right alongside testosterone to maintain a healthy libido. So while the ratios are definitely different, estrogen is serving absolutely vital functions in everyone. Okay, so this is absolutely crucial. Look at how wonderfully estrogen interacts with cholesterol in our blood. Think of HDL, which has a high protein ratio, as the hero, and LDL as the villain of the story. Estrogen actually possesses this incredible cardiovascular superpower. It actively increases the good HDL cholesterol and, at the exact same time, decreases the bad LDL cholesterol. By managing these cholesterol levels so aggressively, estrogen is directly protecting the entire cardiovascular system. It literally helps keep the walls of our blood vessels beautifully flexible and healthy so blood can flow easily. This dramatically lowers the risk of cardiovascular diseases. It's a real game changer for heart health. Section 6. Estrogen and bone health. Protecting the skeleton. Which brings us to a bit of a biological cliffhanger. What exactly happens to the body when that whole ovarian hormone factory we talked about just permanently shuts down its operations, usually right around the age of 50? Well, at menopause, the ovaries essentially just run out of functional follicles. This causes a really sharp, noticeable drop in estradiol, and that drop is what triggers those very real physical symptoms, like hot flashes and night sweats. But, the human body's incredibly resilient. The adrenal glands and fat cells actually step right up to take over the burden. They start producing a new postmenopausal form of estrogen, called estrone, just to keep things running. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive full-body consequence of that hormonal shift, especially when we look at our skeleton. Down at the microscopic level, our bones are constantly being broken down and rebuilt in a process called remodeling. Now, estrogen normally acts as the brakes. It significantly slows down the specific cells that break bone apart. So when estrogen levels plummet after menopause, those brakes are basically released. Bone breakdown rapidly accelerates, and that can lead to fragile, weak bones, a condition we all know as osteoporosis. So, from acting as a tiny microscopic key that unlocks and commands our cellular DNA, to being the grand architect of our skeleton and our cardiovascular health, these hormones are literally nothing short of miraculous. Considering estrogen's vast lifelong influence on us, how might we better support our own hormone health throughout every single stage of our lives? I think that's an absolutely crucial, deeply important question to leave you with today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep learning.